The first time I let myself believe my wife was cheating, I was on my knees at midnight, chasing a receipt across the kitchen floor because it had slid off the counter and vanished under the refrigerator. When I finally pinched it out of the dust, I saw a hotel charge stamped with the name of a lake town 2 hours north of us. For a night Rachel had told me she spent alone at a brand summit downtown. I remember holding that thin strip of paper under the range hood light, reading it 3 times, feeling something cold walk up the back of my neck. 2 coffees, 1 breakfast for 2, a late checkout fee, a room with a lake view. I did the math on the dates before my brain even caught up with my chest, and the math was wrong in the exact way that ruins a man's life. I asked her about it the next morning, careful, casual, the way you approach a dog you're not sure is friendly. She barely looked up from her phone. She told me the summit organizers had comped a block of rooms and she'd shared one with her assistant to save the brand money, that the second breakfast was for the assistant, that I was reading a spreadsheet like it was a diary again. She said it with a little laugh, the kind that makes you feel like the crazy one for even holding the paper. And because I wanted to believe her more than I wanted to be right, I put the receipt in the junk drawer and let her turn the whole thing into a story about how I never trusted her ambition. By lunch, she'd made me the one who owed the apology. I gave it. I actually gave it. You should understand who we were before all this, so you understand how far she had to reach to erase me. I build cabinets. Real ones, the kind that outlive the people who order them, out of a shop I rent behind a tire place in Fort Collins, Colorado. My hands are always split at the knuckles and smelling like walnut oil. The house we lived in wasn't fancy, but it was mine before it was ours. A low brick ranch my grandfather deeded to me the year he died, with a garden I'd terraced myself and a porch I'd rebuilt board by board. Rachel used to love that house. In the early years she'd sit on the porch railing while I worked and tell me it felt like the only honest place she'd ever lived. Then somewhere around year 4 she discovered a camera, and the honest place became a set. She started small, the way these things always do. A few videos about slow living, a morning routine, a series about decluttering your home to declutter your soul. She was good at it, I'll give her that. She had a face that softened when a lens turned on, and a voice she could drop half an octave to sound like she was telling you a secret. Within a year she had a following. Within 2 she had a brand, a word she used constantly, and a whole aesthetic built around a woman unbecoming everything the world told her to be. She called the account Unbecoming. The tagline was some line about how you have to lose the life you built to find the life you were meant for. I didn't think much of it at the time. I should have read it as a warning because that tagline was a plan, and I was the life she'd built. The red flags didn't arrive all at once. They accumulated, the way sawdust does, invisible until suddenly it's everywhere and you can't remember the room ever being clean. First, it was the phone. Rachel had never once locked her phone in 6 years of marriage, and then one week she had a passcode, and the next she had it turned face down at dinner, and the week after that she was taking calls in the garage with the door pulled shut behind her. When I mentioned it, she said the brand had sensitive partnerships now, and she had to protect her contracts. That word, partnerships, started doing a lot of heavy lifting in our house. Then came the trips. Scouting trips, she called them. Location work. She'd disappear for 2 nights to shoot solo journey. Content in places a solo journey doesn't require a second person to film. And she always came back glowing in a way that had nothing to do with mountain air. She bought lingerie she never wore for me, still folded with the tags on in a drawer I wasn't supposed to open. She started running at 5 a.m. With a new intensity, changed her perfume, deleted her call log every night like she was clocking out of a job. And there was a name that kept surfacing in the margins of her life without ever being introduced to me. Derek. Her videographer. The man who suddenly needed to be on every trip, in every planning call, tagged in nothing but present in everything. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things in those months. Standing in my shop at night running boards through a planer I didn't need to run just to have a reason not to go home. But a man knows. Long before he can prove it, long before he'll say it out loud even to himself, a man knows when he's become furniture in his own marriage. I had become the thing that held the room together and got looked past. I paid the mortgage on a house she used as a backdrop. I cooked the dinners she photographed and didn't eat. I was the quiet, dependable weight that made her flights possible. and she had started to resent the ground for being ground. The undeniable part, the part one couldn't argue myself out of, arrived on a Tuesday, through a machine the way modern betrayals do. We shared a family iPad that lived on the kitchen counter, the one we used for recipes and streaming and nothing else. Rachel had set it up years ago on her own cloud account and never changed it, back when she still shared her life with me. That morning her phone must have hit the wrong button, because the iPad started syncing her camera roll, and I picked it up to check the weather, and instead watched a woman's whole secret download itself into my hands. One thumbnail at a time. There they were. Rachel and Derek in a bed that wasn't ours. In a room with a lake view I recognized from a receipt in my junk drawer. Rachel and Derek at a restaurant, her hand on his jaw. A video, 15 seconds, that I made myself watch to the end because I owed it to the version of me who'd apologized to her over breakfast. Timestamps going back 8 months. 8 months. There were even shots of the two of them planning something on a laptop. A mood board with her face on it and words like the reinvention and the departure. And I understood, standing at my own kitchen counter, that my wife hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been storyboarding her exit, turning our ending into content, casting me as the dead weight she heroically escaped. The cheating was almost the smaller crime. The bigger one was that she planned to sell it. I didn't smash the iPad. I didn't call her. I set it down exactly where it had been, wiped my prints off it out of some instinct I still can't explain, and stood in the kitchen until the coffee I'd made went cold. Something in me went very quiet and very clear. Not rage. I kept waiting for the rage and it didn't come. What came instead was the feeling I get right before I make a cut I can't undo. When the wood is marked and the saw is spinning and there's no more measuring left to do. I took screenshots of everything onto a drive that would never touch a cloud. Then I made her coffee the next morning like nothing had cracked open, because I had decided, in the space of one cold cup, that I would not fight her on her stage, in her lighting, on her terms. She was going to hand me the ending herself. I just had to wait for her to reach for the mic. She reached for it 2 weeks later. She came into the shop, which she never did anymore, stood in the doorway so the sawdust wouldn't touch her linen, and told me she needed to go away for a while. A creator trip, she called it. 10 days in Tulum, sponsored, important for the brand, non-negotiable. She said it the way you'd tell a contractor you'd be out of town, not the way you'd tell your husband. She said she needed space to figure out who she was without the weight of other people's expectations. And I understood the word wait meant me, the way it always had. She told me not to wait up, not to call, that she'd have spotty signal. She kissed me on the cheek with her eyes already somewhere else, and she left for a trip like I was a house sitter she didn't need to brief, like I didn't matter, like I was already a paragraph she'd finished writing. She thought my silence was surrender. She had always thought that. That was the great misreading of her life, that a man who doesn't perform his pain must not have any. She got in a car she didn't tell me was driven by Derek, though I saw the plates from the shop window, and she rode off toward the airport laughing at something on her phone, and I watched the taillights go and felt the last thread of the old me snap clean. I did not chase the car. I did not send a text. I went back inside my grandfather's house, sat down at the kitchen table where I'd once been happy, and I started to plan the only thing left to build. I want to be honest about what I did next because it matters that I did it cold and I did it right. I did not go nuclear. A public meltdown would have been a gift to her. Raw footage for the very story she wanted to tell, proof of the unstable man she was so brave to leave. Instead, I did the quiet, unglamorous things that actually change a life. The next morning, I sat in a lawyer's office with a folder and let a woman with reading glasses tell me what was true. The house was mine, legally, cleanly, premarital separate property deeded to me alone. Never refinanced into both our names because Rachel had never wanted her credit tangled in old money. Her phrase, back when she thought the house beneath her. I owned the walls she'd been using as a backdrop. The lawyer told me exactly what I could and couldn't do, and I listened like my life depended on the difference because it did. I filed. Papers were prepared to be served. And I learned that in my state, in my situation, with the deed in my name and the marriage already legally ending, I could reclaim my own front door. The receipts I already had. The affair I could prove with a hard drive full of timestamps. But there was a second story I needed to kill before it was born, the reinvention she'd been storyboarding, the one where I was the villain, and for that I needed the person who'd been helping her build it. Her name was Beth. She'd managed Rachel's brand from the beginning, the one who edited the raw, unscripted videos that took 9 takes, the one who knew where every polished lie was buried. I remembered her from the early days before the transformation era, when Rachel still let me be a person at her dinner table. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. I didn't reach out. She reached out to me 3 days into the Tulum trip with a single message that said she was done, that she couldn't be part of it anymore, and that we needed to talk. We met in the back of a coffee shop near the university where no one would know either of us. And Beth looked like someone who'd been carrying a secret up a hill for a year. She didn't waste time. She told me Rachel had been planning the departure for the better part of a year, that the affair and the brand pivot were the same project, that there were product mock-ups already sitting in a shared folder, hoodies and mugs, and a whole merch line built around leaving. Truth is heavier than comfort, one of them said. Choose the version of you that scares them. There was a book, too. A memoir, half-drafted. And I was in it. Unnamed but unmistakable. The quiet, controlling husband whose silence was a cage. Beth showed me the working title on her phone, and I felt the floor tilt. It was some line about being unbecoming, about how she had to burn the house down to find the door. She meant the house figuratively. It was my grandfather's house, and I decided in that coffee shop that if she wanted to make a metaphor out of my home, I would make it literal and lock it. Beth had kept everything, the way people do when they know they're standing next to something rotten. Draft scripts. Voice memos where Rachel bragged that controlling the narrative was more powerful than telling the truth. Messages where she coached Beth on how to frame the marriage as suffocating without saying anything technically false. And, without my even asking, the thing that mattered most, proof that the whole solo journey was never solo, that Derek had been on the payroll and in her bed for the better part of the year she'd spent making me feel like the paranoid one. Beth sent all of it to a drive I could hold. She told me Rachel thought I was too passive to ever defend myself, that this was the load-bearing assumption of the entire plan, and that she thought I'd forgotten Rachel had made one fatal mistake. She'd spent years teaching me to be quiet. She never noticed I'd also learned to pay attention. The Tulum trip was 10 days. I used every one of them. I did not touch a single one of her belongings in anger, because anger leaves fingerprints and I wanted this clean. On day 6 I had her served, quietly, through her lawyer, so that the machinery was undeniably in motion and no one could later call it a jealous impulse. On day 8 a locksmith spent an afternoon at my grandfather's house while I stood in the garden I terraced and watched a man reduce my whole marriage to the turn of a new cylinder. On day 9 I packed her things. I want to tell you I did it with contempt, but the truth is I did it with a strange, aching care, folding the linen she loved, wrapping the ceramics her grandmother had left her, coiling the cables of the ring lights and cameras that had turned my home into her studio. I didn't want to be the man she'd write about, so I packed her life like a professional and set it on the porch I had rebuilt board by board, in weatherproof bins labeled out of the rain, because even at the end I couldn't make myself be the thing she needed me to be. And then there was the message. She'd left me a role in her finale so many times, a silent prop turned toward the camera on cue, that I decided her return deserved a script of its own. Mine this time, one she couldn't edit. I didn't write a speech. I didn't fill a page with everything I'd swallowed for a year. I taped a single sheet to the front door at eye level, weatherproofed in a plastic sleeve like a set of blueprints, because that's what it was, the blueprint of an ending. I wrote that the locks were changed, that her things were on the porch, that my lawyer's name and number were on the back, and one line at the bottom that I'd rewritten a dozen times until it stopped shaking. I wrote that I finally understood the tagline. You have to lose the life you built to find the life you were meant for. I told her she could keep the life she'd built with Derek, and I was keeping the house I'd built with my own 2 hands. Then I went to my sister Katie's place across town, sat in her guest room, and waited for a woman to come home from a trip and find out she no longer lived there. She landed on a Thursday. I know the exact hour because Beth was still on the group thread and forwarded me the story Rachel posted from the airport, a sun-drunk selfie captioned about coming home renewed, laughing, radiant, a woman who thought she was returning to a set that would still be standing exactly where she'd left it. Derek dropped her off, I found out later, the 2 of them pulling into my driveway loud and easy, still laughing at whatever people laugh at when they think they've gotten away with it. And then the laughing stopped. I wasn't there to see it, and I've never once been sorry about that. I didn't need to watch. I could reconstruct every second from the 7 missed calls, The way the voicemails went from amused to annoyed to something with an edge of real fear when her key wouldn't turn and the porch light hit a wall of labeled bins and a sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve with her whole future written on it in a cabinetmaker's careful block letters. She read my blueprint standing on the porch I'd rebuilt, in front of the man she'd rebuilt her life around, and for the first time in a year I wasn't the one standing outside a locked door holding a plate of somebody else's dinner. Her first move was the one I'd bet the house on, because it was the only move she had left. She couldn't fight the deed and she couldn't fight the timestamps, so she went after the only thing she'd ever really trafficked in: the story. Within a day the narrative started, careful and low, never quite a public accusation because she was too smart for that. She whispered it instead. She told her followers she was going through a season of grief without naming the source. She told mutual friends, in that trembling confessional voice she could summon on command, that I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I'd changed the locks in a fit of control and rage, that she feared for her safety, that the man she'd loved had come undone the moment she chose herself. It was the perfect trap, the same one she'd built our whole marriage inside. If I stayed silent, the silence confirmed the unstable man. If I raised my voice to defend myself, the volume proved his instability. She'd spent years making my calm look like coldness. Now she was making my calm look like a threat. She even called Katie, which was her mistake, the way underestimating me had always been her mistake. She called my sister 2 days after landing and told her, in that same fragile voice, that she was worried about me, that I was spiraling, that someone should check on me before I did something drastic, planting the seed so that if anything ugly ever happened it would grow in ground she'd already tilled. Katie played along on the phone and then called me the second she hung up, furious, because Katie had known me for 39 years and had watched me build things and lose things and never once come undone, and she recognized a woman laying a foundation for a lie. That call was the moment I stopped waiting. Rachel had reached into the one place I thought she'd never touch, the story of whether I was even sane, and she'd done it with the same vulnerability she'd sold to strangers. She weaponized the idea of a man in crisis. So I decided to hand the people she was whispering to the truth, not loud, not public, just the raw material, and let it do what raw material does. I did not post a single thing. That's the part I'm proudest of. A public post would have made it a war between two accounts, and wars online are won by whoever performs pain the best, and she would have beaten me at that on my worst day and her best. Instead, I took the drive Beth had given me and the drive I'd built myself, and one by one I reached the exact people Rachel had whispered to. The mutual friends. Her manager's replacement. The 2 brand contacts who'd been about to sign the reinvention campaign. I sent no commentary, no accusation, no plea. Just timestamps. Just the mood board with her face on it and the word departure. Just the voice memo where she said controlling the narrative mattered more than the truth. In her own voice, undeniable. Just the 8 months of a Lakeview room. I let people do their own math the way I'd been forced to do mine on a kitchen floor at midnight, and the math was undeniable in the exact way that ends a brand. The whispering stopped almost overnight. The friends who'd been so worried about me went quiet, then apologetic, then gone from her comments entirely. The reinvention campaign evaporated. 2 sponsors backed out of the Tulum content before it ever posted, and the sundrunk selfie from the airport aged into an artifact from a life that no longer had a next chapter. Beth left officially, publicly, a clean resignation from a brand that had run out of story. The memoir, I heard later, died in a drafts folder because you can't sell a book about the cage your quiet husband kept you in when the quiet husband turns out to hold the deed, the timestamps, and the moral high ground. Rachel had built a temple out of a story, and she'd made the fatal mistake of building it on top of a man who kept his receipts and never once raised his voice. She sent me exactly one message through all of it weeks after the porch. No greeting, no apology, just a demand to know what I had done, as if she couldn't fathom that the furniture had a plan. I looked at it for a long time in Katie's guest room. I thought about everything I could say. The year of it, the receipt under the refrigerator, the 15 seconds of video I'd forced myself to finish. And then I typed one line and put the phone down. I told her I'd finally answered a question she never bothered to ask, which was whether I was paying attention. I never heard from her again directly, and the not hearing was its own kind of peace. A month passed. Then 2. I moved back into my grandfather's house, into rooms that finally stopped feeling like a set, and I did the small ordinary things a man does when he's remembering he exists. I fixed the porch step that had squeaked for 3 years while I was too busy holding a marriage together to bother. I planted tomatoes in the terraced garden. I built a bookshelf for a house that was only mine now, and I put my own books on it, and no camera watched me do it. The strangest part of coming back from a thing like that isn't the anger draining out. It's the quiet arriving and not being weaponized, quiet that belongs to you, quiet you chose. I hadn't had that in years. I'd forgotten a house could be silent without someone editing footage in the next room. I heard, secondhand, that Rachel eventually went live one last time, months later, a stripped-down video with no ring lights and no ambient music, and admitted that not everything she'd shared had come from truth, that some of it had come from fear, that someone had deserved better than the story she'd told about him. She never said my name. She didn't need to, and I didn't need her to. No one snapped their fingers. The comments were quiet in a way her comments had never been, and I understood that her power over the story had finally cracked, not because I destroyed her, but because I refused to let her destroy me. I found out about it from a link Katie sent with no message attached. I watched 30 seconds of it, standing in my own kitchen next to a toaster I'd bought for one, and then I closed the browser and made dinner, and it was the least dramatic moment of the entire year, and it healed something the drama never could. I met Ellie at a lumberyard, of all places, arguing good-naturedly with the guy at the counter about the price of quarter-sawn oak because she was building her own bookshelf and refused to overpay. She didn't know me from a video. She'd never heard of Unbecoming. She had no idea that the man helping her load boards into her truck had spent a year being written into someone else's origin story as the villain who couldn't handle a woman's light. She just laughed at a terrible joke I made about how oak holds a grudge, and asked if I'd help her figure out her joints, and I said yes, and I meant the wood, and later I meant more than the wood. We had coffee. Then we had a lot of coffees. And the first time she came to the house my grandfather built and sat on the porch railing where a different woman had once told me it was the only honest place she'd ever lived, Ellie didn't tell me the house felt like a set or a symbol or a season of anything. She said it felt like a place a person actually lived. And for the first time in longer than I want to admit, I didn't feel like a cautionary tale or a prop or a paragraph someone had already finished writing. I felt like a man in his own house, with the locks he chose, and a door that only opened for the people he let in.